You can be wrong, you can be arrogant, you can't be arrogant and wrong. Welcome back to the 511 show, and this is an interesting episode here because, as I've been telling you guys for the last few weeks now, Tucker Carlson, who has basically made it his life's mission becoming an enemy of the nation of Israel and the Jewish people, has now essentially, not, I wouldn't say change direction, but he's also focusing on a new target, and that are Christians who also support the Jews in the nation of Israel. And this is a big reason why you see so much online opposition to the theology of dispensationalism. And for what I've noticed, there's two people who primarily are the ones who have an irrational hatred for dispensationalism. Now, the overwhelming majority of these people, just to bluntly put it out there, are anti-Semitic. These are people who hate dispensationalism because dispensationalism is really the only, I wouldn't say the only key theology, but it's the only one that really preaches a future for the nation of Israel and the Jewish people. It doesn't preach, replacement theology or covenant theology that just says that they've been completely disregarded. It's all about becoming a Christian now. There's no more plan for Israel. There's all this, synagogue of Satan stuff that they like to teach. They hate that primarily because of that issue. So a lot of these people, like Tucker Carlson here, who's platforming the criticism of dispensationalism here, they all hate it because it in some way is favorable to the nation of Israel and the Jewish people. There's a smaller subset of people who are also hostilely against the dispensational teaching. It is not as much as they're anti-Semitic, but for some weird reason, they have this obsession that they hate dispensationalism because dispensationalism also teaches about a pre-tribulation rapture. And they think that that's wrong because in their mind, no, the church is going to have to be a part of the tribulation. They're going to have to survive all 7 years. And you brought on this guy, John Rich, who's a famous country singer, who I believe like a year or two ago, they had a sit-down conversation about this, and he basically said, the same thing, that people who teach about the pre-tribulation rapture are false teachers because they're teaching people that they're going to get out of the tribulation for free, that they're not going to suffer, they're not going to see the Antichrist. He talks pretty much a lot about that here again, which is why I'm going to play his video here. But let's get into essentially what John Rich says is his opposition to dispensationalism in the teachings of the pre-tribulation rapture. And there are a lot of falsehoods here, a multitude, which we'll talk about here in a second.
Is because the last interview that we did really had a lasting effect on me. When we did the interview, it was about your song Revelation, which I thought was great, but I didn't understand. I still don't fully understand a lot of the theology around it. It's not the world that I come from, to put it mildly. But you made a point about something called dispensationalism. Yeah, the theology of dispensation, and you criticized it. You said you don't think it's biblical, and I wasn't exactly sure what you were talking about when we had the conversation, but it set off a chain reaction in me. I learned much more about it, and it really did change my views. But in that conversation, you said there are a lot of preachers who will hate this. And I've never met any preacher, who even knows what that is. So it's like, it's, again, not my world.
Right.
My question is, what was the effect, the aftermath of that interview?
A lot of preachers hated what I had to say.
They did they?
Yeah.
Did you hear about it?
Oh, I went on YouTube and I couldn't watch them all. There were so many of them. I mean, some of them were 10 minutes long. Some of them were 2 hours long. Some of them were
responding to your views.
Oh yeah. Some of them were sermons where they would bring it up. I know you've probably seen this song, Revelation. And I just want to go into that. Anybody that says that, what John Rich is saying is a heretic.
Actually,
that's a bad word. That's a really bad word. A heretic. Yeah. And it's false teaching and it's false doctrine and it's but he's a false.
Now, keep in mind, in the context of a video we went over a couple of days ago, Tucker Carlson went on his platform to call anyone who believes that there's a future for Israel, basically anyone who believes that Christ is going to reign from Jerusalem from 1,000 years, that person's a heretic. Anyone who believes that the church has not replaced the nation state of Israel is also a heretic. So Tucker has over the last few weeks throwing around that word to anyone who disagrees. So him playing shocked, it's like, oh, they're calling you a heretic over that? I can't believe that. It's like, it's so disingenuous.
False. Also a terrible word. I'm anything but false. I have my faults. False is not one of them.
I've noticed, yeah.
And so I went, well, we hit the mark with that, because their congregations are now going, I'm going to go read Matthew 24. John said, go read it. I don't really know what it says, so I'm going to go read it.
Right.
And I'm telling you, man, I have had thousands of people online on social media hit me up and say, I just read Matthew 24 twice, like you said, and it absolutely says that. That is just what it says. I can't believe I ever thought it was different than that. Like the whole point of it, for people that don't know what that is, dispensationalism is basically saying that before the tribulation hits, before things get really, really bad for Christians on the earth, that they will be raptured out of here. They'll be pulled out before the really bad stuff happens. And it doesn't say that. It actually, Jesus lists off all these things that are going to happen prior to his return. And the wrath that Christians will be living under during the tribulation is the devil's wrath. We're not spared from the devil's wrath. We're spared from God's wrath.
So let's start here, because there's a couple of things that we need to discuss here. One, we actually are going to read Matthew 24, because what John Rich's interpretation, what Matthew 24 actually says, does not hold up when you put very, very strong context into who Jesus is speaking to, which we'll do here. But a lot of people who deny the pre-tribulation rapture, and I believe based on what Rich is saying here, he falls more in line with the pre-wrath tribulation view, is that it's funny because their entire point is that they're anti-dispensationalism and that they despise dispensationalism. Yet for some reason, when it comes to the context of Revelation and the tribulation, they all of a sudden become dispensationalists, because what they try to do is that they try to separate the wrath of God, which is the 7-year tribulation, and try to break that down in the parts, dispensational parts, by saying that, oh no, this is just the beginning of sorrows. Oh no, this is just Satan's wrath. Oh, this is just the wrath of man. The wrath of God is the only thing that we get spared of. So they create this theology that, no, actually you have to experience at least the first 3.5 years, maybe about 5 years of the tribulation, and then when things get really, really, really bad, then you'll get spared there. I talked about this on this particular show on the Bible Lens. I've talked about this on the site as well. The pre-wrath tribulation view, which essentially says that before the bowl judgments gets poured out, when the swords and people get burned up and all that stuff happens, that's when you get raptured. That's a view, the point that's actually setting you up for the false prophet of Revelation. And what Rich doesn't understand, because he doesn't actually say it here in this video, is that there's a thought process within a lot of people who don't truly understand Revelation as much as they think that they do, that it's the Antichrist is the one that brings forth the mark of the beast, and that for 7 years we have to avoid the mark of the beast through the Antichrist. That's actually not what the Bible says. If you look at Revelation 13, where it talks about the Antichrist, and there's a second figure that people often completely and utterly ignore. He turns out to be the most important figure in the entire Bible. I mean, not entire Bible, but the entire Revelation and the tribulation. It is the false prophet. And why is that? The false prophet is actually the one who brings forth the mark of the beast. If you read Revelation 13 in detail, which we will, the false prophet is the one who brings forth the mark of the beast so that everyone worships the Antichrist. So his viewpoint here is skewed in a multitude of ways, but even there, let's go into a bigger picture here. Because, like I said, these people don't think that the entire tribulation is the wrath of God. Okay, who's the person who opens the seals that start Revelation, that starts the events of the tribulation? Who opens the seals that releases the 4 horsemen? Who actually unleashes the Antichrist onto the world, according to the book of Revelation? It's Christ, the Lamb, the seals of the Lamb. He's the only one worthy enough to open the seals. So if God is quite literally the person who begins the tribulation by opening the seals, how can you sit there and come to the conclusion that the entire tribulation is not the wrath of God when God is the one who controls everything? Why are the events of Revelation happening? What is the point of the tribulation. Why is there a 7-year tribulation? If you don't understand that point, everything else that comes next is going to go completely over your head, as it does with John.
And God's wrath is final. That's when whoever's left at that point gets pulled out, and then God pours his wrath out, and the whole thing gets wiped out. And he rebuilds it, and that's a whole other story. But American Christians and American preachers don't want to have to think about the fact that they're going to have to go through something difficult. Well, I'm sorry. Why don't you take a little trip around the globe and go meet with some Christians who are literally meeting in caves and in basements of houses, and if they're caught, they're murdered or imprisoned for the rest of their life, or chopped up into pieces like what's going on in Syria right now, where they just hack them up. Or go down to Africa, where there's Christians in mainly Muslim-dominated countries, and they're actually practicing Christians. You know what happens to them? They steal all their kids, they hack up all the men and women, and they move on, and that village is just gone.
There's 3 points here that I want to bring up what he just said here. One is that the argument that he's using here, this example of, well, these American Christians just want things easy. They don't want to suffer like those Christians over in Syria and Nigeria. Well, first of all, you're using 2 arguments that are actually contradicting each other when you do this, right? Because on one hand, you're essentially saying that Americans believe in this easy believism that, they think everything's going to be easy and well for them. It's like, it's the idea that you've heard many times before that, you can't just believe in Jesus Christ and be saved. You can't just believe. That's easy believism. You don't want to work as hard as some of these other Christians out here. Well, at the same time, that easy believism can be betrayed to the same people that you're talking about here. The people who are getting killed in Syria, in Nigeria, and places like that, they're not getting killed because of their good works. They're not being killed because they're abstaining from porn. They're not being killed because, they're staying away from drinking or sexual immorality, or they're doing a lot of good works. That's not why these individuals are being killed. These people are being killed because in the countries that you listed, which I find it very, very ironic that Tucker was very, very quiet during this part of his little rant here, because a lot of these nations are Islamic nations where you're not allowed to believe that Jesus Christ is the Son of God, because that puts you under the wrath of, what do they call it? Blasphemy laws that say that the Prophet Muhammad was wrong. And that's why those people are being killed in those countries. So you're pointing the finger, trying to use the example of Christians that are being martyred in other countries to say that Americans are lazy, that they don't want to suffer, as if suffering is a requirement for being a Christian. Now, the Bible tells us we'll go through trials and tribulations as Christians, that we will have persecution for our beliefs, absolutely. But this whole idea that, no, you have to suffer, is that a salvation requirement? Is suffering a requirement for salvation? Do you have to be martyred? Do you have to be tortured? Does things have to be very, very uncomfortable for you to be saved? Or do you just have to hear the word of God and believe the word of God and believe the death, burial, resurrection of Jesus Christ to be saved?
And you're telling me that fat, lazy American Christians have more of a right to be spared pain?
So you saw it there. He now thinks that if you believe in a pre-tribulation rapture, you're fat, lazy, and I guess un-American. And then he uses the straw man that, you think that American Christians are more worthy of being saved than the Nigerian Christians? Well, first of all, that is an argument that no one who supports dispensationalism actually believes. Because let me ask you this little question. Does the pre-tribulation rapture from dispensationalism teaches that only American Christians get saved? Is that what they teach, that only the American Christians are going to get saved, or everyone else is going to be, they're going to have to suffer? Is that what we teach? No one teaches that at all. It says believers, aka the righteous of the world, at the beginning or the start of the tribulation, are raptured out. That is not specific to the United States of America. That means Christians in the UK, in Germany, in Syria, the ones in Iran, the ones in China, the ones in North Korea. That is not a American specific teaching by any course of the imagination there. The overwhelming majority of people who call themselves Christians in 2025 are actually following the teachings of Augustine and not the teachings of the Bible.
Then those people are worshiping Jesus Christ, knowing it could absolutely cost them their life.
And why is that? And why is that? Why is it the fact that those people could absolutely lose their lives as a result of following Christ? Why?
And they're doing it anyway. They are elite to us. They are giants of Christians in these other places.
Yes.
So basically, what he's saying here is that the people who are being martyred in other countries are better Christians than you. Let me ask you this question. Is that a biblical interpretation? Now, I will say this. There are definitely Christians who will be rewarded heavenly more than other Christians will. And let's be honest, not every person who gets saved is going to have the ability to do good works in the eyes of God, right? People will call that easy believism, but let's be honest. Deathbed confessional, somebody who's literally on their dying days or dying months, whatever the case may be, turns his life over to Christ, and because of his dying state doesn't have a lot of time to do a lot of good works to impress Christians like John Rich. Is he going to have a lot to show for his faith? Probably not. Is he still saved? Yes. Is he going to be viewed as a lesser Christian as a result of the fact that he wasn't nearly as impressive during his Christian run as somebody else? Not in the eyes of God. Maybe in the eyes of you.
I agree with that.
Yes, they are elite. They are God's elite Christians.
They are elite Christians, and you're fat and lazy. So, again, isn't there a Bible verse talks about staying away from men who sow discord among brethren? Isn't that in the Bible too? And you can look it up your own time.
All you bad names, blah, blah. That's not real persecution. And so I take real issue with Christians that say, God would never make us go through that. I'm like, what Bible are you reading?
Now, he's very, very arrogant in this belief that, well, God will never make you go through a trip. Like, what Bible are you reading? You think that God's not going to let you suffer? Well, again, this goes back to our first question. What is the actual point of the tribulation? Is the tribulation meant for believers to experience and suffer through because they have to? Why is that? Well, here's the problem with a lot of people with Tucker's view and John Rich's view. They don't actually know, or at least refuse to accept, what the purpose of the tribulation actually is. Well, let's go to Matthew 24 to get some of the answers here, since he wants us to read Matthew 24. So Matthew 24 here is the verse, the chapter that John Rich essentially endures that you all read on your own, maybe twice. Maybe you should read it twice. But here's the problem. If you don't understand the context of what's being told here, then you're not going to understand what Jesus is actually telling you. Because a very, very simple question that a lot of people trip over is that, who is Christ talking to in the context of this particular conversation? Now, at the beginning, the first two verses of Matthew 24, Jesus prophesies the destruction of the second temple here, right? So this was talking about, I say unto you, not one stone shall be left up here upon another that shall not be thrown down. This was a future prophecy of the destruction of the second temple in 70 AD, a temple that has not been rebuilt since its destruction, right? So then he sat down on the Mount of Olives. Now, where is this happening? By the way, is happening in Jerusalem. So the disciples came to him privately saying, tell us, when will these things be, and what will be the sign of your coming and the end of the age? So Jesus then goes on to tell them the events that are going to take place in the final days, right? He talks about, nation coming against nation, famines, pestilences, earthquakes, all these things that are later given more context in the book of Revelation. But here's something that almost everyone, including Rich here, seems to forget or overlook. Let's go over here to verse 15 when it talks about the Great Tribulation. This is the Great Tribulation that Mr. Rich here believes that you have to survive and experience and suffer through as a Christian, as a believer. You have to do this. The problem is, what does it says here in verse 15? It says, therefore, when you see the abomination of desolation spoken by Daniel the prophet standing in the holy place, whoever reads, let him understand. Well, let's start there in verse 15. Again, who is the audience being addressed to here? Let me just go even stronger than that. When Jesus was talking to this particular group of people, which group of people would have understood the reference to the abomination of desolation spoken to by the prophet Daniel in the book of Daniel that was written before Christ? The Jews. The Jews would have known this because it's a reference to what happens to Israel in the end times. The entire point of the tribulation, when you read the book of Daniel, Daniel 9:24 through 27, is that the entire point of the tribulation, the entire purpose of it, is to revive and restore the nation of Israel from their state of iniquity that they are currently in to this day. Now, simple question: does the nation of Israel believe in Christ right now? No. Easy answer. They are not in a nation in belief of Jesus Christ right now. No one would even say otherwise. They are currently in unbelief. What is the purpose of the 7-year tribulation? Is to bring Israel to belief. Now, does that mean that just because they're Jews that they're going to get saved, that all of them are going to be saved? No, because the Bible doesn't even tell us that. You can read the book of Zechariah and know that in Jerusalem, 2/3 of the people in that region are going to be killed. So just because they're Jewish does not mean that they're going to be saved. 2/3 of that entire region is going to be completely wiped out by the armies of the Antichrist, primarily as it relates to the last 3.5 years of the tribulation. But 1/3 of that region is going to be refined, and they're going to be the ones who see Christ coming back to save them from the armies of the Antichrist. When you actually read Revelation in its context, you see, okay, why does Jesus come back? Who does Jesus come back to? What does Jesus do when he does come back? He comes back to Jerusalem to face off with the enemies of Israel, those enemies being represented in the Antichrist, the false prophet, and Satan. Keep this in mind here. You don't see the false prophet and the Antichrist and Satan coming to New York City or to Los Angeles or to Atlanta. You don't see him coming to the UK or to any of these other nations. Where is he being drawn to? He's being drawn to Jerusalem. The armies of the Antichrist are being drawn to Jerusalem. This is a prophecy that relates to Jerusalem. Where is Christ going to return to? Jerusalem. Why? Because his feet are physically going to land on the Mount of Olives, splitting it into two. This whole chapter here is talking about what is going to happen to Israel in the end times. You still don't believe me? Let's go a little further here. It says here that, when you see those that are in Judea, flee to the mountains. Where is Judea? Where is modern day Judea? Is that America? Is that Britain? Is that Canada? Is that India? Is that Japan? No, Judea is a reference to Israel. So he's telling those in Judea to flee to the mountains, to not go back and get clothes, and not go back and get things, but to flee. Woe to the women who are nursing babies in those days. Verse 20 here. Here's another interesting one. Pray that your flight may not be in the winter or on the Sabbath. Now let me ask you this. Who honors the Sabbath? That would be the Jewish people, right? Correct? And it says here, so there should be great tribulations that have not seen before the beginning of the world till this time, nor shall there ever be. When you look at this in context here, this is all relating back to the end times for Israel. Now, the counter argument to this will be, so what, you're saying that this isn't going to happen in the rest of the world? No, I'm not saying it's not going to happen in the rest of the world. As a matter of fact, as we know from reading Revelation, 25% of the world's population dies just from the seals alone. The seals that are opened by who? Jesus, right? So for those saying that, oh, that's Satan's wrath, that's not God's wrath, well, Jesus is the one who opens the seals that leads to 25% of the world's population dying just from the plagues. Not in general, but just from the plagues, 25% of the world's population. So what is happening here? Two things are happening in the context of the tribulation. One, God is essentially allowing Satan and the Antichrist to seize Israel, because what did Jesus say to Israel when they left them in the state of unbelief? That you will not see him again until you say, blessed is the one who comes in the name of the Lord, which is a prophecy that goes all the way back to the book of Psalms. God is allowing this great calamity to happen upon Israel so that one day Israel comes into repentance and believes in Jesus Christ as the Messiah. Revelation 13 and 11 here talks about the beast from the earth. Like I said, so many people who claim themselves experts of Revelation, they always forget about the false prophet. But what does it say here in the false prophet? That this individual has 2 horns like a lamb, but speaks like a dragon. Any reference in Revelation to the lamb is Christ. Any reference to a dragon is Satan. So he's going to have the physical appearance of Jesus, yet speak like the devil. That's what it's saying here. And it says here that he exercises all the authority of the first beast, being the Antichrist, in his presence, and causes the earth and those who dwell on to worship the first beast. So it's the false prophet that leads the world to worship the Antichrist. Again, a lot of people don't understand how Revelation is actually going to go down. So here's Rich talking about why people who believe in the pre-tribulation rapture are wrong, and they need to know that they're wrong because he knows better.
Check for saying that?
That's fine. Call me that. The Pharisees and Sadducees called Jesus all kinds of names. They can't stand it when you call them out. It really hits them the wrong way, which is great. It should hit them the wrong way because they are wrong and they know that they are. And they bought into centuries of that spin on that particular subject. And it's just, most Christians don't think that there's anything wrong with it because they've always been taught that. They don't know that that's not right. So it's just ignorance on.
So you're ignorant if you believe in a pre-tribulation rapture. I'm going to go to you and explain to you exactly why the pre-tribulation rapture needs to happen. But
And the real problem is telling people that they're going to be raptured out of here before, for instance, the Antichrist shows up or before the mark of the beast is implemented. They think they'll be gone before those things happen. Well, that's not true. They won't be gone before it happens. So what danger does that put them in? That means if they're alive on the earth when the mark of the beast is implemented and when the Antichrist shows up and makes himself known and they're still here, they're not going to think that's the Antichrist and they're not going to think that's the mark of the beast. And I believe that's part of the great deception that is talked about in the New Testament.
actually, it's not. We'll talk more about that great deception here in a second, but let's isolate the premise here from John Rich. He's saying that, it's dangerous to believe in a pre-tribulation rapture because when it doesn't happen, according to him, you're going to be stuck on the earth during the tribulation and you're not going to know that it's the Antichrist. You're not going to know that it's the mark of the beast, and you might accidentally take the mark of the beast because you don't think that it actually is. Okay, let me isolate this argument. This is one of the dumber arguments by people who argue against a pre-tribulation rapture. Because people are so convinced by their own understanding that the mark of the beast is going to end up being something like some kind of Elon Musk brain chip that gets implemented into their forehead, or some kind of credit card scanner that's going to be inputted in their hand or something like that. Because everyone, even to be fair here, even a lot of dispensational people kind of believe this. They think that, the mark of the beast is going to be some kind of technological advancement that's going to be inputted into people, and then that's going to be the mark that damns people for an eternity. Like that's not it at all. First of all, as I just read from Revelation 13, the mark of the beast does not come into play until the false prophet brings forth the mark of the beast. He does not come into play until the second half of the tribulation, because he leads the entire world to worshiping the Antichrist. And as we just explained here, the Antichrist does not demand worship until he sits in the temple, which does not happen, according to the book of Daniel, till the 3.5 year mark of the tribulation. So this idea that you can be in the tribulation for 3.5 years and somehow not know that the guy who's going around making peace deals with Israel and gaining all this worldly power among world leaders for 3.5 years, somehow you're not going to know that's the Antichrist, is absolutely asinine and absurd. On the flip side of that, this whole notion that, somebody might take the mark of the beast and not know it and they might go to hell. The mark of the beast is not something that you're going to accidentally take. It's not, guys, let me be very strong about this. You're not going to go to the doctor's office one day, get a tetanus shot, find out that the tetanus shot was actually the mark of the beast, and then you're going to hell. That's not what's going to happen. No one is going to be tricked into taking the mark of the beast. No one is going to accidentally take the mark of the beast. No one is going to unknowingly take the mark of the beast. Let me break down something that even John Rich here doesn't understand. The mark of the beast is a literal mark from a literal beast. It's not an allegory. It's not symbolic. It's literally called the mark of the beast because it is a beast that gives the mark. So when you see the beast that gives the mark, which we've talked about here on this show, it's called the Daba. Go look into Islamic eschatology and study the Daba to figure out where the real mark of the beast comes from. When you see the beast that gives the mark, under no circumstances whatsoever are you going to be deceived into thinking, I didn't know that was the mark of the beast. I didn't know that was... there's no way when you see the beast that gives the mark that you're going to be tricked into taking the mark of the beast. So I want to help you guys understand why there needs to be a pre-tribulation rapture, where the pre-tribulation rapture is in the Bible. If you want to go back and find where it actually is, go all the way back to Genesis 18. Now, again, this is not an argument that many people use to source the pre-tribulation rapture. You'll hear people talk about 1st and 2nd Corinthians and 2nd Thessalonians. I want to go back to Genesis 18 because this is what I like to call the divine ledger. This is an article that I wrote earlier for Society Reviews, why Genesis 18 demands a pre-tribulation rapture. And how do you come to that conclusion? Go back to when Abraham was interceding for Sodom and Gomorrah, and he basically asked God the question, pleading that he will not sweep away the righteous along with the wicked. So if you guys remember the story of Abraham interceding for Sodom, God made a promise to Abraham that if there were 10 righteous people in the city of Sodom and Gomorrah, that he would spare the city for the sake of the 10 righteous people, right? So this isn't as much as a covenant as it is a promise that God gave to Abraham, which means that God cannot go back on his promise that he made to Abraham, meaning that God cannot sweep away the righteous along with the wicked. So what do you see here in two stories in the Bible where God brings judgment upon the world? However, he spares the righteous before the wicked. You see this primarily in the story of Noah, where God floods the entire world thanks to the Nephilim. However, it was Noah and his family, I should say, who were spared. They built the ark, they were spared from the wrath, and then God flooded the entire world and killed everyone else except for everyone who was on the ark. You see the same thing here with Sodom and Gomorrah. God pronounced judgment on Sodom and Gomorrah that he was going to destroy the city because of their wickedness. But because of his promise to Abraham, he said that he was going to spare the righteous before placing judgment on the wicked. So what happened? Lot and his family were removed. The angels came to Lot, told them that they need to flee the city because judgment is coming upon them. And then Lot and his family left, and then Sodom and Gomorrah got destroyed. So this is the central basis here. God made a promise to Abraham, which he has to keep, because God is not a liar, that he will not destroy the righteous along with the wicked. So how does this pertain all the way to the tribulation and the pre-tribulation rapture? It's very simple. We know that God is the one who opens the seals that begins the tribulation. He unleashes the Antichrist. He unleashes the seal judgments, which is famine, war, hyperinflation, pestilence, all these things. But how can he do that while keeping his promise that he made to Abraham in Genesis 18? It's simple. What happens 1 second after a pre-tribulation rapture? This is the basis of the entire argument here. What happens 1 second after the rapture? God comes, Christ, removes his church from the earth, meets his church up in the clouds. By the way, there's another key difference between the rapture and the second coming. Jesus in the rapture meets us in the clouds. In the second coming, his feet touch the Mount of Olives. So these are two completely different events, just in case you guys weren't following there. But when he raptures his church, cuts them up in the cloud and catches them up to heaven with him, then he can then go on to open the seals, which starts the events of the tribulation. Why is this significant? What happens 1 second after the rapture? 1 second after the rapture, there will not be a single righteous person on the earth when that happens, meaning that 1 second after the rapture, there will not be a single person on that earth for that 1 second who is righteous, who believes in the death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus Christ. There will be nothing but a world full of unbelievers at that very second. And at that very second, Jesus can then break the seals to begin the events of the tribulation at that moment. And at that moment, while he's pouring out his wrath, he won't be doing it on a group of righteous people. He'll be doing it on a group of unrighteous people. Now, this is where people get confused, because you'll say that, well, wait a second, the Revelation says that there's saints in the tribulation. Yes, there are saints in the tribulation. There are believers in the tribulation. Here's the key question. Were they believers before the tribulation started? The answer is no. They were not believers before the tribulation started. They became believers during the events of the tribulation. So when we put this precedent this divine ledger against all of the rapture views that exist in the Bible, the pre-tribulation rapture is the only one that allows God to keep his promise to Abraham. Jesus himself says in Luke 17, 26 to 29, that it will be as if the days of Noah, like the Son of Man, like the days of Lot. He's making a reference to both instances where the righteous are removed before the judgment comes. So let's go ahead and here talk about this, right? If we're putting this up with all the other rapture views, then there's three outside of the pre-tribulation rapture. Mid-trib, can God keep his promise to Abraham during a mid-tribulation rapture? The mid-tribulation rapture is people who believe that we're going to get raptured at the 3.5-year mark, which is basically when the Antichrist declares himself to be God. This places believers under the first half of the tribulation, when the seals are unleashed for war, famine, and death. The martyrs of the fifth seal are already dead by the midpoint, while their souls are crying, how long? God's promise to Abraham cannot survive the slaughter of even one righteous person in the tribulation's opening act. So the mid-tribulation rapture view cannot withstand the promise that God made to Abraham. The pre-wrath tribulation view, which is what John Rich subscribes to, says that, well, before the bowl judgments, but after the trumpets, is when we get raptured out, right? So before things get really bad and people have to drink blood in order to survive, that's when we get raptured out. The problem is that the trumpets include hailstones the weight of a talent, which basically think of hail the size of a small car. That's what you're talking about here. Demonic torment that drive men to suicide for 5 months. Or we're talking about the word that's being used here in torment, Revelation 9:5, is the same word that is used for Christ's suffering. This is not persecution, but divine wrath. The wrath of God was placed upon Christ on the cross. It's the same wrath that's being spoken of even before the bowl judgments. So when you understand the Greek and the meaning of these words and put them together in its proper context, you see that this is what John Rich is saying, that, oh, that's just Satan's wrath. That's not God's wrath. So don't worry about that. It does not hold up at all. So under this viewpoint, once again, God cannot keep his promise to Abraham in a pre-wrath viewpoint. Then you have the post-tribulation rapture point, which is the most egregious of them all. This basically says you're not getting raptured until the very, very end when Christ comes back, right? This requires the believers to endure the entire tribulation, which, again, you're talking about, I would say at the halfway point of the tribulation alone, you're talking about the deaths of half of the world's population. That's 4 billion people, by the way. And you're telling Christians that they have to prepare to survive in an event that they very well may not survive just by the events that happen during this time period. So that's a whole conversation here, but including the Antichrist 42-month reign, Zechariah, where it talks about the fall of Jerusalem, where the cities are going to be taken, houses destroyed, the women are going to be raped, all these other things. If the church goes through the entirety of the tribulation, God has broken his word to Abraham on a global scale. So the pre-tribulation rapture is the only one that satisfies God's promise to Abraham found in Genesis 18. The church comprises of all of those who are righteous by faith, according to Romans 1, and removed before the first seal is broken in Revelation 6:1. At that moment, not a righteous person remains on the earth. Thus, God's wrath on a completely unbelieving world can begin at that moment. Thus, God can keep his promise to Abraham while bringing just judgment upon the rest of the world at that moment. Now you say, well, what happened to the people in there? Are they not considered righteous? Not in the same way that the church is considered righteous. Because during the tribulation, as you know, what has to be kept? You've heard the everlasting gospel is talking about keeping the commandments. It also says do not take the mark of the beast. Because if anyone takes the mark of the beast, they're essentially assured damnation. So there is no internal security during the tribulation, in the sense that, you know, a true believer can essentially believe at a certain point of the tribulation, but then somehow take the mark of the beast towards the end. Because that would contradict each other, right? There are going to be people who place their faith in Christ, and as I said, as the events of Revelation unfold in real time, it's going to become more and more clear who is on the side of Christ and who is on the side of Satan, and there won't be any trickery or deception found there. Again, do not think of the mark of the beast as some kind of Elon Musk brain chip or some kind of COVID vaccine. That's not what's being spoken of here. If we continue a little bit more here, it says that the tribulation saints from Revelation 7, 9 to 14 were post-rapture converts who are not righteous at the start of the tribulation. Their white robes were washed in the blood of the Lamb after the church's departure. This timing preserves the Abrahamic covenant. The seals, the trumpets, and the bowls only target unbelievers, while the righteous who are already in heaven watched from the sea of glass in Revelation 15:2, the pattern of Noah, where the righteous are removed early, the pattern of Lot, the same day removed, and the church being removed before the first seal is consistent. You only get this with a pre-tribulation viewpoint. And when you understand that the point of the tribulation is for Israel's repentance to bring them into belief of Jesus Christ, you realize the church, believers in this age right now, serve no genuine purpose during the tribulation. This is not a test. This is not for you to show that you're a better Christian than those weak, fat, and pathetic American Christians that think they're just going to get everything easy. That is not the purpose of the tribulation. And if you don't understand this, you're not going to understand anything that's going to happen here. And final note here, the final ledger, the divine ledger that you find here in Genesis 18 is not a footnote. It is the balance sheet of divine justice. Every martyr beneath the altar, every saint to overcome the beast, every city rifled in Zechariah, all comes back to God's promise unless the church is gone before the first line is written. This is why we believe in the pre-tribulation rapture. It's not Darby. It's not the Scofield Bible. It's not dispensationalism. It's because by understanding the full context of the Bible, Old Testament and New Testament, you see an undeniable pattern that leads up to the time events that we call the 7-year tribulation. It's not a modern invention. It is a timeline that we have seen now for going on 4,000 years. Abraham's question, God's promise, can only be fulfilled through a pre-tribulation rapture. It's just the way that it is. But I'll stop here because we've been going on for a little bit. But let me know what you guys think of John Rich's comments, the whole Tucker situation, the argument on dispensationalism. Let me know what you guys think, and I'll hear you guys out on the next video. I guess we'll just go ahead and end this one here. I'll see you guys. Adios, goodbye, and good night.